All right, welcome to Q2 Week 2 of English 12B. Last week I covered an introduction to Romanticism and then the Byron, Shelley, and Keats recording for you. So today we're going to go over the Gothic literature. It's pretty short in terms of what we actually have to do. It's, as always, super important that you have gone through the tutorial before you watch this video. I am not going to explain some of the stuff that you might need to have already read to know how to do the assignment. You can read all of this yourself or have it read it to you. I'm just going to go over what you're being asked to do. So there's 3 parts to this lesson activity about analyzing themes in Frankenstein. So Gothic writers incorporated a variety of themes into their writing. Some of these themes included the dangers of forbidden knowledge, unstable identity, and the clash between the demands of society and natural impulses. In this activity, you'll analyze the themes present in Mary Shelley's Gothic novel Frankenstein and compare and contrast them. All right, so part A, what statement is Shelley making about human nature in Frankenstein? Is it as simple as asserting or putting forth that all humans are capable of being vicious and cruel? Why or why not? You should write a few paragraphs for this. Hopefully I'll be able to point you in the direction of some good information. Consider a few ways that the novel uses nature to connect Victor and the monster. Choose at least 2 instances and evaluate how effective this method is in connecting the characters. And then you need to go through and find 3 words that you need to look up. Use a dictionary, dictionary.com. It's a website. All right, so if we go back here, you get some information about like why Frankenstein was written. It was actually like sort of they did this like competition thing, and that's sort of how she ended up starting to write it. So the themes that she discusses include the need for love and companionship, acceptance of responsibility, nature versus nurture, language, and dangerous knowledge. So you can see all the main characters. I'm going to click this on. Okay. And so you get a lot of information that like kind of about what volume 1 is regarding. So you're introduced to the doctor, Victor Frankenstein, who is the one who ultimately creates the monster. You get a little bit of information about this idea and what Shelley, when she was writing this, connected to is this idea of Prometheus, who, like Prometheus, cared for his creations, Victor abandons him, so you have that sort of difference. A lot of stuff about symbols here. And then you get information about the creature. There's another volume. So there is a lot of reading, which is why I'm not going to read it to you. As you can tell, I probably can't. You can find all of this. You can listen to the whole thing. You can watch movies. There's lots of different information that you can get about it, but you should scroll through it and sort of like look around to just kind of get an idea for how it's written. But for now, I'm going to show you 2 videos that'll hopefully give you some information, and one of them really talks mostly about that theme of nature and nurture. So this one is a full summary of everything, and the next one will dive specifically into that theme.
Frankenstein begins when a young man named Captain Walton takes a ship into the Arctic Ocean. He's hoping to make important scientific discoveries. His ship gets stranded for a few days when a sheet of ice forms all around it. To his amazement, he and his crew see a gigantic man, about 8 feet tall, driving a dog sled across the ice until it disappears in the distance. A little later, they see a normal-sized man on another dog sled, chasing the first one. This man is almost dead from exhaustion and exposure, so they take him aboard. The man is Victor Frankenstein. Walton becomes friends with him, and while Frankenstein is recovering, he tells Walton his story. Frankenstein grew up in Geneva. His father had been an important figure in the government, and they were well off. He grew up with his cousin, Elizabeth, whom his parents expected him to marry eventually. He had a little brother named William. He had a best friend named Henry Clerval. Frankenstein goes to a famous university in Ingolstadt, where he becomes very good at science. He figures out scientifically how to bring something to life, though he doesn't tell us what the secret is. He makes a creature using parts from a graveyard. On a rainy night in November, he brings it to life, but he's so horrified by it that he runs away. The next day, his friend Clerval arrives at the university to begin his studies, but Frankenstein becomes ill, and Clerval spends all winter nursing him. Just as he's getting better at the beginning of spring, he gets a letter telling him that his little brother, William, has been murdered. Justine, a servant in his house whom everyone always liked, has been arrested because William had been carrying a locket that was found on her. So Frankenstein heads home. Just before he gets home, he sees the monster from a distance, and he knows that the monster killed his brother. Frankenstein watches Justine's trial, and his cousin, Elizabeth, testifies that she's too nice to have done this, but she's convicted and sentenced to death. Frankenstein has to watch her die. Frankenstein goes with his family on a sightseeing trip, and one day, when he goes mountain climbing by himself, the monster appears to him and makes him sit down and listen to his story. Frankenstein would rather kill him, but he listens. The monster describes how he came to life completely disoriented. He didn't know how to speak or understand language, and he had to get used to the feel of his own body and to figure out basic concepts like light and dark, heat and cold, and hunger and thirst. He eventually wandered out into the forest, where he could hide and look for berries and nuts. The first human he sees is an old man in a hut, who runs away in terror because the monster is so hideous. He's fascinated by the first village he walks into, but the residents are terrified, and they drive him off by throwing things at him. He finally finds shelter in this little shed built up against the side of a cottage. He can look through a crack and observe the people who live there, but they don't know he's there. These people are called the DeLacys, a brother and sister named Felix and Agatha, and their blind old father, who plays the guitar. The creature sees how much they love each other, and he wants to be like them. He starts learning language by listening to them speak French. One day, an Arabian woman named Saifi arrives. Saifi doesn't speak English or know much about European culture, so Felix teaches her everything from vocabulary and reading to history, and the monster learns along with her. He learns to read and write, and about good and evil, and about the history of human societies. In the woods, he finds 3 books: Paradise Lost, The Sorrows of Young Werther, and Plutarch's Lives, and he reads the papers that were in Frankenstein's dressing gown, which reveal who Frankenstein is, where he lives, and how he came to make the monster. The monster starts to hate Frankenstein for giving him such an awful, lonely existence and abandoning him, since he's too ugly to make friends with anyone. Eventually, the monster learns the story of these people. The DeLacys were a rich family in Paris, but Felix helped a wealthy Turk escape from prison because he felt sorry for him. So the government took the DeLacy family's money and banished them, and they went to live in the cottage. The Turk did escape from prison, but he abandoned Felix afterward. But the Turk's daughter, Saifi, had fallen in love with Felix, so she escaped to come marry him. The monster wants to be friends with the DeLacys, and he decides that if he goes to talk to the old man first, the old man will listen because he's blind. When the others leave, he pretends to be a traveler and speaks to DeLacy, and it's going okay until Felix and Agatha and Saifi come back. The women are horrified, and Felix drives the monster off with a stick. At first, the monster goes out into the woods and decides that he's going to declare war on humans. But in the morning, he cools down and decides to go back and try again. But he finds Felix giving up the lease, and he never sees the DeLacys again, which makes him feel doubly rejected. He comes back at night and destroys the cottage. Then he starts the long walk to Geneva to try to find his creator. He gets shot while he's on his way there, just because he stops to help a woman who's drowning. When he gets to Geneva, he grabs this little boy, thinking that he could use the boy to learn his way around. But when the boy mentions his father's name is Frankenstein, the monster kills him to get revenge on Frankenstein. You might notice that there's an inconsistency in the story here, because Victor made the creature in November, then got sick all winter. William got killed the following spring, maybe 6 months later. But the creature spends a whole year at the cottage, and he kills William more like 18 months after being created. So there's a difference of a year between the 2 stories. Just to be even more hateful, he puts the locket William was carrying in Justine's pocket, knowing she'll be condemned for murder. The monster insists that Frankenstein make a female as ugly as he is, so he'll have a companion. He promises to go away with her to South America, and threatens to kill lots of people if Frankenstein won't do it, so Frankenstein agrees. Frankenstein decides to go on a long trip and work on the new monster away from home, so he and Clerval go on a long sightseeing trip through Germany, England, and Scotland. He eventually rents a little cottage on a remote island in Scotland to do the work. But he gets disgusted and destroys the new creature before it's finished. The monster comes in to find out what he's doing and is furious that Frankenstein broke his promise. The monster swears he'll get revenge and says, "I'll be with you on your wedding night." Frankenstein takes all the parts and puts them in a basket, then sails out in a boat at night and dumps it all. Then he goes to sleep in the boat. When he comes ashore, he's in Ireland, and the people arrest him. It turns out someone strangled his friend, Clerval, and they think Frankenstein did it. He gets sick again because he's so upset that the monster killed another of his friends, and a magistrate has him nursed back to health. He's eventually released, since he didn't kill Clerval. He goes back home and he marries Elizabeth, like they've been planning their whole lives. He thinks the monster is planning to kill him on his wedding night, so he sits up waiting with a gun, but the monster actually kills Elizabeth. His father dies of grief soon afterward, so Victor has lost everybody. He devotes his life to finding the monster and destroying it, but the monster keeps going farther and farther north, until they're chasing each other on dog sleds far out to sea. After he tells Walton the whole story, he dies. The monster comes on board the boat to pay a final farewell to Frankenstein. He tells Walton he's going to set himself on fire and destroy himself, because he didn't mean to be bad. Walton winds up taking the ship back home, partly because the crew makes him, and partly because Frankenstein's story shows that scientific discovery isn't worth sacrificing your life for. One of the major questions of the book is how much we should blame Frankenstein for what happens, and how much the monster. Critics like to point out all the things that are wrong with Frankenstein, because he was irresponsible and created this monster for no good reason. Then he abandoned his creation, instead of helping it, and he was very careless about protecting his friends. Readers tend to see the monster as more at fault, though, because even though he gets a lot of bad breaks, being frighteningly ugly and misunderstood, his decision to kill a child is just evil, and he keeps killing people out of spite, or for revenge. Another question is whether the creature is naturally good, like he claims to be, and what it is that makes him become evil, his own choices or things that happen to him. For more information about Frankenstein, check out the Frankenstein SparkNote on sparknotes.com.
Not a bad idea. All right. So this one is more specifically focused to this idea of like how the monster becomes evil. Hopefully you find this useful when kind of thinking about like human nature with this idea, and then the connection between Victor and the monster via nature.
It was on a dreary night of November that Victor Frankenstein beheld the accomplishment of his toils. With his creation finally complete, he would set out to terrorize neighboring towns of Switzerland. Actually, he was so disgusted with his creation that he got a fever for over a month. Meanwhile, the monster wandered around forests with the mind of a newborn child and the body of an ugly giant, or so he says. According to the monster, he was a benevolent creature at first. However, after being cast out because of his appearance, he fell upon the path of revenge upon his creator. He relates to Victor, "I am malicious because I am miserable," and that's how most people nowadays end up being the creature. Far too human-like to avoid expressing empathy for its tragic situation. Isolated from civilization and thus happiness. Unable to make any human connection due to its ugly looks, and thus driven to a violent revenge in order to punish its creator for causing its suffering. These ideas echo today's scientific conflicts in finding answers to fundamental questions of our lives. On one hand, is behavior an innate part of our personality, or is it formed by our daily life experiences and the environment around us? We don't know much about the biological origins of the monster. However, looking into the time period and historical context, we can find likely sources of scientific inspiration for the electrical experiments leading to the monster's creation. Scientists of the time were obsessed with creating life through electricity, after the discovery that running an electrical current through a dead frog caused it to move as if it were alive again. In England, the technique of galvanism, the stimulation of muscles with pulses of electrical current, was allowed on the remains of executed murderers thanks to the Murder Act of 1751. Therefore, it's extremely likely that Victor Frankenstein's access to body parts for his monster came from dead criminals. This lends credibility to the idea that if there's something biologically different about murderers, then the monster's violent tendencies and eventual killings can be traced back to his biological beginnings as a fusion of dead criminals. On the other hand, during the Romantic era, there was also an emphasis being placed on the upbringing of children and how it affected their personality. Scientists were also intrigued by the concept of feral children. Children raised without any socialization that ended up unable to reintegrate into society and in a permanent mentally stunted state. This raised the question as to the possibility of human perfectibility. This can be seen in Victor's motivation for his creation. Can he create an ideal being? Taken in the scope of feral children, it's possible that the monster's murderous and almost animalistic tendencies are due to a lack of socialization. However, the monster was exposed to human morality and ethics early in his life. Perhaps its capacity for revenge, an entirely human trait, was a result of its exposure to human behavior, lending credibility to the idea that it was the monster's upbringing that brought about its capacity for violence and evil. The outcome of these experiments during Shelley's time led to the belief that nurture played a more important aspect in the development of children. The stories and experiments of feral children shocked the general public and led to the belief that, in the words of modern scientist Dalthwaite, Frankenstein and other works of the time attempted to realize ideas of human perfectibility through isolation or innovative educational schemes. Whether in fiction, philosophy, or actuality, produced monsters or at least harmed the subjects of such experiments. The relationship between upbringing and inherent traits in Frankenstein remains relevant even today in the nature versus nurture debate. Frankenstein shows the longevity of the arguments and provides a historical context to people's beliefs. In addition, there are still children being abandoned or kept from having normal interactions in the world, which causes serious mental challenges for them. Additionally, investigation into the role that DNA plays in our daily lives can provide us with significant clues in how we can be able to help victims of childhood neglect.
Look at all those sources. That's great. Sources are wonderful. All right. Cool. So again, you might want to definitely make sure that you read through the information that's given to you um, throughout the tutorial. A lot of this information is going to be really important. So for part B, we're using, if we're talking about nature connecting Victor and the monster together, this light symbol and light imagery and stuff can be used because light and dark are parts of nature. So that's something that you could use. So slide 24 is good info. We don't really talk about that, but then you also, again, Frankenstein and the creature. So again, this is all information about the two of them. We get, yeah, all their different connections. All of this is just important for you to make sure that you read through to really be able to tackle it, because it is asking you to pretty much read the entire book. So making sure that you go through that. Here you have a little bit more information about nature and nurture. But hopefully you found those videos had some useful information to prepare you to answer these questions. Let me know if you have any other questions, but that'll do it for Unit 6. Oh, you know what? I don't think I went over the activity, so let's take a look at that. All right. So you're going to click on the link that says copy. Make a copy. All right. So you're going to basically look at poems that were in last week's tutorials. So from the romantic stuff, and then you're going to say which poem you choose and why in complete sentences. So please let me know what poem it is that you picked and why you picked it. And then you're just going to answer all of these questions again in complete sentences. This is English 12. And then you're going to write an essay, about the poem. You have some websites to help you out, and then an explanation of what I am looking for and how points are assigned for the poem. All right, there we go. Now we're all set. Have a good one.